All right, well, my clock just struck noon, so we are going to get started. I'm Seth Green, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to our virtual version of the Leading for Good conference. We are sad not to be in person with all of you this year, but we are grateful to have extraordinary people that are now being able to be learned from and heard across 3 weeks of content. Just to give you a preview of what's ahead, we are currently in the Big Idea Power Chat section of the conference, and we have been thrilled to have a number of exciting Power Chats already, which I'll mention in a moment. Our main conference will take place on May 7th. And then right after that, we're going to start talking, for those of you who are rising leaders, about how the information at this conference can fit into your careers. And we're really looking forward to having the opportunity to dive deep with you on how you thrive at the intersection of profit and purpose. Just to give you a sense of videos that are coming your way or already in your inbox, we had on Monday a power chat with Diana Aviv, the former CEO and president of Feeding America and the independent sector. We also had yesterday a power chat with Michael McAfee, the president and CEO of PolicyLink. That will be going out shortly. And then coming up, we have a power chat with Ami Eubanks Davis, a leader in urban education through Braven. We have a power chat with Mamadou Aboussar, the leader for so many different aspects of ESG in our investing. We have a power chat with Romena McCann, who is at the group that Rishad knows very well. She's the CIEO at Publicis Group, and she'll be talking about delivering on inclusion. We have a power chat with Tonise Paul, who is the chairman of Energy BBDO. And we have a power chat with Tony Hunter, who is the CEO of McClatchy, and Xavier Ramey, who'll be talking about 1 year after George Floyd from his perspective as CEO of Justice Informed. So we have a phenomenal lineup. And as you know, because you are here with us, we are today going to be hearing from Rishad Tobaccowala, who is a senior advisor to the Publicis Group and the author of Restoring the Soul of Business. But I will only share that he is one of the people I admire most for his really insightful perspective on how we move forward with purpose in capitalism. And I'll let my colleague, Ryan Paul, who is the director at One North and who is a candidate in the Baumhart Scholars MBA, tell you more about him because he'll be moderating our discussion today. And so let me turn it over to you, Ryan, and then I'll be back when we get to audience questions around 12:30.
Great, thanks, Seth. And excited to be here today to introduce Rishad because having been in the digital design agency realm for the last 15 years, he is a name and a figure that I know well, but more from the lore and having just met him personally today. But Rishad recently completed his book as a best-selling author of Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. He shared with us his morning or his daily routines now and his 3 focuses on the book, speaking engagements and consulting, as well as his blog and kind of thought leadership piece. And you can visit this at Rishad. So we'll put this back in the chat, but rishad.substack.com, and it's free to sign up for. I believe, Rishad, you're doing these daily for these kind of thoughts, musings, and introspectives from the industry.
It's every week, every Sunday.
Every week. Great. So we'll put that in the chat here. And Rishad has a very impressive background. From most recently, writing the book and kind of driving thought leadership. Going back to his speaking engagements across a variety of industries and organizations and industry associations. He served as chairman of Digitas and Razorfish. And for those of you who don't know, these are 2 of the largest digital agencies in the world with over 11,000 employees. And in his illustrious 38-year career, he's worked in almost every area of marketing and strategy and really is known as a pioneer in digital marketing and a real true digital marketing leader. And he was named by Business Week as one of the top business leaders for his pioneering innovation, and Time Magazine dubbed him one of 5 marketing innovators. And lastly, and Rishad, this list goes on and on, so I want to make sure we have time to talk because you are so accomplished, but he is an Ad Age Interactive Hall of Fame and received a Lifetime Achievement from the Chicago Ad Federation. So again, has plenty of accolades and wonderful experience. But we're so grateful and excited to have you here today. So thank you for joining us. With that, I want to start with, if you can give us, Rishad, just in a few minutes, a brief snapshot of your journey. What brought you here today, and maybe some of the key moments, key milestones that you achieved along the way, and why you remember those most.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everybody who is attending or listening, or who will listen, delayed format. So very quickly, I grew up in India in a city called, it's now known as Mumbai, but I refuse to accept it's called that. It is a city called Bombay, which is where I grew up. I did an advanced degree in mathematics, and I came to the University of Chicago for an MBA in 1980, graduated in 1982, and I joined a company, a company I was very interested in, but the only company I actually also got a job in, called the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency here in Chicago. And, in those first 21 years, I think the most important things that shaped me were my parents, who taught me about the importance of reading and the importance of education and the importance of giving back, which were the three key things. When I came to the University of Chicago, I basically learned how to think, which was a combination of my math and how to think, because they had a policy which basically said, we're not going to teach you case studies of the past. We're going to try to provide you with skill sets, because by the time you have an opportunity to implement it, it'll be a decade from now. So we're going to try to help you think. Leo Burnett, obviously getting a job there made a very big difference, because I was not to know it, but I ended up staying at Leo Burnett or companies that bought them or in the family for my entire 38-year career. So I often say that is either a testament to loyalty or more likely a testament to unemployability. I got one job and I held on it for life, and I ended my career there. In those 38 years, I joined the Leo Burnett company, the last time my business card said Leo Burnett was 1995, which was more than 25 years ago. But I still was working at the Leo Burnett building, and I never left, and I never changed stuff. And the reason was because I came across something called interactive marketing, or I launched a thing called the Leo Burnett Interactive Marketing Group. This was 1995. And as a result of that, I got very involved in the world of digital. I then helped Leo Burnett's media department become part of the freestanding operation called Starcom. So Renata McCann, who's been an earlier speaker, was the chief executive officer of that, among other things. And then helped build the case for digital investments after Publicis bought us, which was Digitas and Razorfish, among others. I then eventually, in addition to chairing those companies, rose to being on the board of Publicis, or what they call the Directoire Plus. And I was the chief strategist of the group globally. It's about 80,000 people, and the chief growth officer. And about 2 years ago, I started a new career where I stopped working full-time. I still advise them. In fact, this entire week, I'm spending 5 hours every morning with them. I'm doing something internationally. But I worked on my book, and I worked on a speaking relationship. And in my Leo Burnett years, in addition to obviously getting the job, or in my Publicis years, the people who made a very big difference, besides all the people around me that actually made me look good, were certain bosses. There was a boss early in my career who told me how to get adjusted to American culture, that America was not going to adjust to my Indian culture, that I had to adjust to the American culture, and how to do it. And he helped me. And a lot of people, I mentioned that in my book, and people say, in today's environment, people would not tell you that. And I said, I'm glad people did and showed me what I needed to do, which is number one. I was very lucky to have two amazing bosses that I worked for 25 years, a gentleman called Jack Clues and a gentleman called Maurice Levy. And throughout all of this, the lady that I met when I was 12 in India is my wife 50 years later, though we've only been married for 36 years. And she and my daughters have probably made the most significant difference. So that's my journey.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I love to hear, in our journeys, there's these moments that kind of provide information and teaching, et cetera, but then the people that really help shape our paths. And thank you for highlighting that. And, I mentioned to you before the call, my father's originally from India and came to the States to get his PhD. And a big piece for him was as well navigating a new culture and a new and carrying over. You already had this intellect and this intelligence, but then how do you operate that in a whole new kind of cultural setting? So I love tying that back together and how that was a key factor in helping you to assimilate. You talk about in your book, again, Restoring the Soul of Business, this idea of digitalog, right? Which I really, really love because I've experienced this on many levels. And I just ask if you could elaborate on how you see the collaboration of digital tools and analog people, right? Like,
Sure.
Talk to us a little bit more about how you see those two things coming together.
Sure. So the premise of my book is based on some observations I had as the world became more digital and more data driven. And I obviously was aware and alive to those because I was leading some of our digital and data driven organizations, and I have a degree in math. But I was beginning to understand that many companies and many individuals were having trouble because we had forgotten that we were no longer just living in a data-driven digital silicon-based world, but the people who were living in it were analog carbon-based feeling people. And too many businesses were focused on the left hand, which is what I call the spreadsheet of a business, the math, the data, and the outcomes, and not enough on the right hand, which is the story of the business, which is the culture, the meaning, the purpose, and values. And I then did some analysis that basically showed that the most successful individuals, teams, and businesses were ones that combined the two, right? The way to describe it is if you only think about the math of a business, you end up like Wells Fargo opening fake accounts. If you think only about the purpose and values and story of the business, you end up like WeWork getting high on your own air, the original WeWork. When you combine the two, you begin to have amazing companies, whether it be a Southwest Airlines, a Costco, or even a Microsoft after Satya Nadella took over. And he basically said, we're no longer going to be a know-it-all culture. We're going to be a learn-it-all culture. We're no longer going to see the world through Windows. We're getting rid of the Windows division. And we're going to be open, and we're also going to think about people. So that has basically been the basic nature of my book, which is we all have these amazing plans. We have strategies. We have a whole bunch of stuff, but then people get in the way. And so how do we actually solve for the people equation? Why is it good for people, etc.?
And it's an interesting thing when you think about the world that we do have to live in. And as it evolves, all the technologies, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and her ability to get on at age 2 to touch an iPad and within 30 minutes completely be able to navigate it. Whereas, I'm thinking back to my days of Oregon Trail and an Apple IIe, right? But right. How these technologies continue to evolve and shape us, but how the human component never leaves. And I think the other piece that was underlying in this, and I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more on, is how do you build the framework and the consciousness, right? Like you talk about that consciousness that's needed from a human perspective that allows us to utilize all these wonderful digital innovations and stay connected into our true purpose with that human interaction.
So, I think what is extremely important is the way you do it is you ask yourself a very simple question, which is, number one, is what would it be like to be the other person that you're dealing with? And to sort of recognize that anybody who is successful, whether as a teacher, a student, but as a person or someone in life, understands that they do that by compounding relationships. And we think about compounding as something that has to do with interest or with money. And that's true. But let's say if you think about compounding relationships, in a compounding relationship, what you have is something that occurs over a long time, continuously improves, and is consistent, right? And that eventually means that most of the benefits come in the latter part of your career. And so what you have to do is you got to think the long run, and you got to basically think what sort of relationships will allow one to continue for a long time, build iteratively, and go for the long run. There's only one type of relationship that does that, right? And that is a relationship that is win-win. Any relationship that is not win-win will not do it. So if I win and you lose, it's not going to be a long-term relationship. If you win and I lose, that's not going to be a relationship, right? If we both lose, that also doesn't basically matter. What matters is a win-win, which basically means you have to go first and give first, right? You have to be generous, and you got to go first, and you got to give first. And we have basically in our world been trained into taking first or not going first or plotting, right? And all these books on negotiation, whether it's in relationships or companies, right? Don't show your hand, don't go first. And my whole basic belief is anybody who's going to spend all their time thinking about that is already leading a miserable life. Go ahead if that what makes you happy. So, in effect, to being generous and thinking how would you be on the receiving end is a key part. You already keep that in mind, and there's no big high fang formula about that.
Yeah, I love that. I think, really cool way to kind of package and think about all of these interactions that we have, right? Leading with empathy, understanding, trying our best to understand where other people are coming from. I personally subscribe to this idea of servant leadership, right? Yep. Which as an agile leader, I'm very big on. I think it goes back to Robert Greenleaf in the late 70s. But this idea that, I'm not going to ask my team to do anything that I wouldn't do. And in fact, I'm going to try to lead by those actions and put myself in those shoes literally, so that we can all kind of learn and grow and have that kind of growth mindset and learning mindset, which is just, really
right.
Always a healthy place to be in.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, with your vast experience that you've had over your career, you've seen a lot of trends, the technology shift, and as you look at kind of the nature of marketing, what has been the biggest shift you've seen in the last 5 years?
Sure. So I'm going to give you a short answer, but for people who'd like not a long answer, but a 6-minute read, it's actually the post that I just did this Sunday. And I simply call it The Future, ... And it's already been read 25,000 times in the last 3 days, okay? And so if you go to rishad.substack.com, that's rishad.substack.com, you can either sign up or don't sign up. Just say, I want to see the stuff, and you can go look at the stuff. And in there, these are the 3 things I believed have always occurred, and these are the 3 things that have occurred over the last 5 years. So the 3 things that have always occurred is that the future does not fit in the containers of the past, right? And today we have to recognize that one of those containers of the past might be the modern office. So that's sort of one part of it. And what I mean by the future doesn't fit in the containers of the past, think about anything you do. Think about music. Think about the way you watch television. Think about everything else. It used to be fixed on fixed containers. Here's a compact disc. Here's a DVD, right? You have to watch a movie in a movie theater. There are these time periods you got to watch. If you miss a show, you got to, look at it. Audio can be separated from video. All that's gone away. So the future doesn't fit in the containers of the past. The second one is the future comes from the slime and not the heavens. And I know I'm speaking at a school, with religious. This is not anything about that. It's basically, we always look to the established leaders and the big people to come up with the next thing. But the innovators are never the people are watching for. So whether you're an individual, a school, or a company, your opportunities and threats are outside of what you're looking at. What do I mean by that? I mean, IBM did not take Microsoft seriously, right? Microsoft did not take Google seriously. If you think to a great extent, Gillette and Schick kept raising their prices, and they suddenly found 15 share points going away with Dollar Shave Club and Harry's, which no one was looking at. General Motors and Ford kept competing with each other and missed Tesla and Uber, who are more valuable than them. So this is also true in life, which is pay attention to people who may come to you for help. pay attention to people who may be humble and simple, and that is a key thing. They can help you. And the third is that the future is bright. That it's very easy today when you put on, like I often say, I'm not scared of anything but the headlines. Okay, you put on television, you put on your streams, and what enrages engages. So it's always stuff that scares the bejesus out of you, or they'll pick only the stuff that will scare the bejesus out of you. And so you get scared. But if you actually look at life 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, regardless of what you are, where you are in the world, 2 billion people have come out of poverty. There's a long way to go for minorities. There's a long way to go for women. There's a long way to go, for a lot of other stuff. But compared to what it was 25 years ago, there has been progress. Maybe a little, maybe too slow. So the third one is the future is always going to get better, regardless of what the headlines say. Overall, this is for everybody. Certain groups, it might not get better. So those are my 3 key things, and that have never changed, right? So I always say, look out, think about how the categories you're looking at and how you're organized might be all wrong. Think about the opportunities and threats outside of where you're looking, and please be optimistic. Those are 3 extremely powerful things. What has changed over the last 5 years are the following. Number one, I'm going to focus on the United States. It's become intensely clear that there are 3 very big demographic changes that were going on for a while, but now have become really prevalent, which is creating some societal havoc, right? And what are those 3 demographic changes? Number one, there is a significant, what I would say, multi-ethnicity happening in America, particularly already under 21. So next year, under 21 in the United States will become multi-ethnic. Some people call it Caucasian minority. I call it multi-ethnic. So that means under 21, because people keep thinking about this date, 2045, when the United States will become multi-ethnic, but under 21, it's already happening next year. So that's one big shift. So we're having a multi-ethnic society. On the other hand, most people who manage companies or institutions in their 50s and 60s grew up in a not multi-ethnic society. So their mindsets are extremely different. The second big shift in demographics is aging. 10,000 people turn 65 every year. Every day in the United States, 10,000 people turn 65 every day. The United States, for the first time, its population growth is slowing. You just saw in the latest census, 7% over 10 years, the lowest it's ever basically grown. And part of it is lack of immigration, but part of it is people live longer, people are not having children. There's a whole bunch of other things that are happening. And when people basically say, old people don't get it, my stuff is someone who's 55 is going to have a pretty decent life, assuming they're healthy at 50 or 55 for another 25 years. Those people control 2/3 of the wealth in the United States, if not more. And COVID has shown that they can completely be willing to switch brands and have new habits. So there's this older and younger thing, besides the multi-ethnic. And third is the divide between the cities and the countryside, particularly the East Coast and West Coast cities and the rest of the world, the rest of the United States. And people keep getting surprised from election results to how people respond. And so in each of those cases, I suggest to people, look out and reach out to the other side, and don't just stay in your social media feed or your group or your television programming, because that will make you believe that what you think and people around you are all saying the same thing. And they're reinforcing. So they make you believe that your flatulence smells like Chanel 5, which it doesn't. Okay. So that's the big shift, which is there are these 3 shifts happening. The other one is obviously increased. We have moved from technology being something on the side to basically becoming a society operating system. Society now runs on technology, and that has accelerated massively post-COVID. Massively. Most IT departments or CEOs will tell you that what they were planning to spend in the next 3 to 5 years, they have basically spent in the last year, right? So we made a quantum jump into the future. That's the second big shift. And the third big shift is, which is very much aligned with the theme and topic of this conference, is the increasingly importance of purpose, values, and meaning. That whether it's big companies like BlackRock saying we care about ESG, which is environment, social, and governance, whether it is people protesting what they see on the street, whether it's people saying, hey, why are you Facebook doing what you're doing? We're going to boycott you. Where there are young folks who are basically calling out the management of their companies. Because what has tended to basically happen is for a company to talk about culture, it better make sure that it cares about stakeholders that are broader than its shareholders. In fact, I basically believe if you actually care about your employees and your customers, your shareholders will make out like bandits. If you focus on your shareholders, you lose your employees and your customers, and your shareholders will lose in the middle to long run. So those are some of the big shifts that have occurred.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, we worked on some of the questions and prep for this ahead, and then your Sunday post came out, and I read it on Monday, and I thought, how perfect this is. It's so timely. I don't know if it was chicken or the egg, but it was perfect. And, you talk a little bit about perspective. You talk about the evolution that we've had. Our 5-year plan was implemented in 3 months post lockdown. Right?
Yes.
Things had to accelerate so quick, and the individuals that had to change and adapt based on this. So, really good points. And I think you did a wonderful job of kind of outlining that in those kind of 3 buckets that you put them in. And I think it's the perfect tie into kind of how we wanted to close the chat, which is based on all of those things you mentioned. How do you see, what are the solution? What are the things you start to see that may not be applied yet? Maybe it's part of the slide. Maybe it's the areas to be looking for of how we connect where we're at and where we're going.
Sure. So, I'm going to start saying that the future is likely to be very good for most people, but it's going to be up to every one of us as individuals to make it good. And one thing that we can control, and that's why I started writing this thought letter, because people said, hey, you've got stuff to share. I said, I'll write it. And I thought I was going to do it randomly, but I've now written it 37 Sundays in a row, right? And what I decided was every one of us has to learn every day and keep growing. And the day you stop learning is the day you start dying, right? So you don't stop ever learning. So one thing you want to do is take time to learn and set aside an hour every day to learn, because the world is changing so fast. It doesn't have to be about technology. It could be about literature. It could be about art, but spend time learning, because as you grow, the only way to get to the future is to learn, because the world is coming in very quickly. The second one is to recognize that the meaning of life is that it ends, which is what Franz Kafka said. The meaning of life is that it ends, which means that think of what your current age is, minus it from 85 years old, which is when most people fall into disarray. Multiply that by 365 days, and that's what you got left, right? When you have a sense that, when people say life is forever, my stuff is, look, you're dying. The question is how many days you got left. And that concentrates the mind as to 2 ways. One is what do you pay attention to? And B is which people do you let bother you? We spend too much of our time being bothered by stupid stuff. Let them go, right? Most of them are self-destroying themselves. Forget about it, right? So focus your time, because that's all you have. Those are the key things I would say. Keep learning, focus your time.
Yeah, that's great. I actually, I'm a big follower of Stoicism, and I've actually used the modern Stoics like Ryan Holiday into a connection into the previous Stoics, and I read a thing called the Daily Stoic, and today was that very topic.
Yes.
The things that are the most valuable are the things that I myself control, my mind and my time, right? And how other people, the reactions and the outcomes from other people, I can't control those things, but I spend all this time worrying about what other people think, right?
Yes, exactly. That's right. And so what happens is, for people who go to rishad.substack.com, the last 2 pieces besides the future, there was a piece which was basically called mindset architecture, right? Which is how do you reorganize your mind in today's world? That was very popular. And then the other one is every one of us is talent. Don't ever let anyone not call you talented. Every single person is talented. That's what I truly believe. We may want to discover exactly what we're world-class at, but we all have talent in every case. But the terrain for talent has changed dramatically. So I've written something called the talent transformation, the transformed talent terrain. And in there, at the end of it, I basically say, here are the 6 things people should do over the next 6 months as we're coming out of this new world. And that is particularly sort of popular. So the whole idea is upgrade yourself, learn how to connect with other people, and remember the time is short.
Great. And Rishad, I have one more question that I want us to dive into, and I know it's going to extend us a little past our original schedule, but you've worn many hats in your career, right? You've had these evolutions, and you talk about the stages of life. Can you share some insight in how you've been able to take the experiences and learnings from one kind of step and role in life and use that to pivot or, you know, advance into these other areas that have kind of led you to the place that you are now?
So the first thing is what I've tried to do is when you go through a particular experience, a lot of people say what builds you and you learn from is experience. It's not necessarily you don't learn from experience. What you learn from is reflecting on the experience you've had and what key things can you extract from it. So what I basically do is my stuff is every time I do something, I write down what are the 3 things that I learned, right? And I literally write down in a book, it's an analog, 3 things I learned, 3 things I learned. At the end of the week, I go through those and say, among all of those things, what are the 5 biggest things that I learned? So instead of having 25, what are or do I see patterns, right? And so eventually I have certain, what I call frameworks. And so then I basically, by those frameworks, allow me to connect different industries and different people, right? So, you know, I often tell people at the core, right? Life is about what? It's about love, loss, and learning, right? So how do you therefore build connections? Because that's helped you on love, right? How do you basically go from learning to wisdom? How do you go from basically loss, right, to eventually an understanding of empathy, right, and grace? And so to a great extent, you take that model and you can apply it everywhere else. Or I basically look at, you know, technology shifts, and I basically begin to see very quickly that there's particular eras, what I call first, second, and third connected age. And I say these things are going to last for 5-7 years, and they're going to have major impact on every industry. So I then take those things to every industry. And the ability to basically reflect on what you have experienced and then write down in abstract what are the key learnings from it, not necessarily the experience itself, and then looking at that and then applying it to other places or challenging it other places. Sometimes you basically say, is this still relevant? So that's how I basically done it. I've had this system on different things, and usually I purposely say, what's the framework? It's very important to understand the framework, because if you don't step aside and understand the framework, you get caught in sort of this little, you know, rat dance, which doesn't help.
That's great. So I will turn it over to you if there's any final things you want to kind of share to close out, or it looks like Seth jumped in. We can maybe jump over to questions, but I really appreciate everything, Rishad. This is a wonderful talk, and Seth, I'll turn to you if we want to open up for questions.
Wonderful. Well, there are questions, not surprisingly, given the provocative and insightful material that you shared, Rishad. I'm going to turn it over first. Molly Matthias, can we have you share your question, and then we'll get to some of the others?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Seth. And thank you, Rishad. I really appreciate your talk. I listened to you talk before, and I always walk away with new insights. And for myself and other young professionals who are on this call, and you know, I'm currently looking at a pivot in my career, but I still want to always be at that intersection of profit and purpose. So do you have any advice for us on how we can thrive at that intersection of profit and purpose?
Yes. So the way you can thrive is very simply do this. One is recognize that fortunately you're now moving into a world where more and more organizations are recognizing that they have to do that too. Like, you know, a decade ago, that was a little bit different. Today, more and more organizations are basically going to do that. The 3 pieces of career advice for folks like you that I would give. The first is take a slightly longer term perspective, which is you may want to usually sometimes do a job or an assignment that is about 50% okay and 50% not so okay. And that's all right, because of earlier in the career, the jobs are a little bit more sucky than later on, just by the nature of how young people in careers are. And in some ways, you're not sure exactly what you want. So if it's about 50% right. So as long as, I would say, accept any job, accept any opportunity, as long as you do not feel that the company or the people you're working with are ethically or morally compromised, right? And you can live with it. So that's one. Second is, think about things that you can supplement. And the reason for that is it's building your career, it's building income so you can pay rent and all of that, which are sort of important. The second is think about carving time out where you can give back, where you may get nothing in return that's monetary, but get a lot that's return in emotion and connections, etc. So, find ways to sort of give back. And you can find things that you believe in, and ideally you are close to in your community or with people that you care about. Because that way, even if you can do this once in a while, you're constantly getting fed by that. And then the ideal way is, how do you connect what you do for the dollar and what do you do for the dream and connect the two?
Thank you. That's great.
Rishad, we have one more question here, and the person has chatted it into me, but is not able to ask because of background noise. So I'll share on their behalf.
Sure.
I'm curious. It says, if you could share more about where you see this movement of purpose going. You mentioned in your talk that there was this rise, and there's curiosity around how that kind of proceeds. There's a sense in the question that, we have talked a lot about this, but not necessarily deeply moved corporations to this kind of more purposive lens. And so there's curiosity about where you see it going and how you see it becoming more and more authentic and accountable.
Sure. So yes, we've talked a lot about it, and we've made halting progress in different directions. The reason and where it's going, it has accelerated and sort of had a quantum jump, and will have over the next 5 years. We're moving our way there, and there is a reason for this quantum jump. So if you think about where purpose, values, and meanings originally were, they were linked into something called ESG, where E was environment, S was social, and G was governance. And those continue to be extremely important, but none of the three were either external nor were they urgent. So obviously environment is extremely important, but a lot of people haven't taken it until recently with urgency. Social was very broad. It could be anything. And governance was internal, which is how do you govern yourself. I believe what you're now seeing, because of both technology and also because of COVID, and also because of movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and a whole bunch of other things, all very critical and important, is the new ESG is employee, society, and government. Okay. I'm not saying the old ESG isn't important, but these are much more specific, much more targeted, much more urgent. That's when things happen. So employee, this next generation, as I told you about this next generation under 34, are far more purpose and value driven. And in order to attract and retain this talent, companies are going to have to do that. And one of the key things I tell people is, tell me how joyful your employees are, and I'll tell you how successful you are as a company. So employee. S is society, versus thinking broadly about what is social. What COVID has done is it basically has shown the fault lines in society, right? Whether it's polarization, inequality, challenges, all kinds of stuff. So society in the United States needs fixing. And that's become extremely, extremely critical. And then G is government. There's been for many years, from the time, Ronald Reagan basically had this joke, which is, he said, I'm here from government and I'm here to help, and everybody laughed. Now just imagine if government had not stepped in all over the world and in the United States in the last year and a half, right? And good government makes a big difference. So what you're going to basically see is people asking, what are we doing for society? It's one of the reasons why now today, even a company like Amazon, the pressure on Amazon is, how do they treat their warehouse employees? How do they treat their line employees? Which is very important. So that is why I think it's going to become very different. It's going to become very different because the COVID world has basically put pressure on it. The next generation believes in it completely. And the economics basically say, if you actually align with it, you could actually make more money which a lot of people care about, or build your reputation. So I think you're going to see more and more about this. But remember this, if you tilt too much towards just purpose, meaning, and value, and you don't run a business, or if you don't run a good school, then people will say, okay, the school has great purpose values, but they don't teach well. The business has very good stuff, but they don't make good products. That won't work. You have to do both together.
We have 2 power round questions now, because I'm conscious of time, but also conscious of how many questions we have in the chat. I'm going to turn it to Neil Gutierrez. Neil, do you want to ask your question? And then we'll give you the 60-second response opportunity, Rishad, if you're up for
All right, perfect.
Hi, Rishad. Thank you
Hi.
so much. I greatly appreciate your comments and insights. I would like to just ask you, what are whether it's a foremost thought leader or an organization that has been in the process, maybe even before COVID, who has made that quantum leap already, or has been pretty advanced, beyond the letter about Black Lives Matter, or beyond the letter of, Stop Asian Hate. Which are the organizations that are really, in Seth's words, carrying out these values and purposes and, things with authenticity and accountability?
From an individual perspective, I would follow a gentleman called Scott Galloway. And Scott has basically built a big case for this again and again. So Scott Galloway. And from a corporation, see now what over the last year Microsoft is doing. Go to its website and see how they've completely done everything from using their dollars, from everything from their suppliers to their vendors, to the way they promote people, to everything else.
Great. Thanks, Rishad. And Amaya, you have our final question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such an amazing talk, Rishad. My question is, like, in a world that is making us think we will live forever, what would you say are a few good practices in a day-to-day basis to implement ourselves to truly live life with a mindset that every day we are actually dying?
Sure. So how do you live life to the fullest? Because every day, if you think about dying, it might become a little problematic. But the 3 key things I do. One, I basically mentioned, take an hour to learn, right? Learn meaning grow knowledge, because that's the one thing till you get, unfortunately, old and Alzheimer's, which can take that away too. But otherwise, the one thing people can't take away. So that sort of learn and knowledge. And because when you learn and knowledge, you feel good, but you can understand the world better. Second is build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe from time to time. And that way you see from another perspective, but it also basically gives you this slap on the head and say, what am I doing? One of the things is, only too well, and it's in your generation, is this thing called YOLO. You only live once. And there's a great article in the New York Times on YOLO. If you just look at it, it's called the YOLO economy. How 40% of people today are thinking of switching their jobs because the past year has sort of indicated there's a different model out there. So build a case for the exact opposite. And third is try to learn and do new things and find ways to give back. I wanted to learn how Substack worked. It was just an experiment to see how Substack worked, because more and more people who were writers were using Substack, authors, etc. And I said, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to give it for free. And lo and behold, by learning it, I've now built a platform where I talk to 25,000 people every Sunday. Right? And which I've again put this stuff out there. And in there, I'm constantly teaching people and pointing to all kinds of things. And people say, wait a second, you've got 150 CEOs and you got 2,000 students. I said, yeah, I'm talking to people. And nothing makes you live forever as much as you help other people, because then they will remember what you gave them, versus buildings and other things.
Well, thank you so much, Rishad. This was a phenomenal talk. I'm going to put up my virtual applause. Thank you, Ryan, for being an outstanding
Thank you,
moderator.
Ryan.
And I just want to share my screen, because now we turn it over to all of you. We have 2 questions we're hoping that you can discuss in small groups. You can see them up here. We want you to introduce yourselves in short form, just to make sure there's time for the second question, which is what resonated for you most in Rishad's talk. And to the point made at the end by Amaya in her question, how will this shape your perspective both on your work and on your life? Rooms are opening. We are very grateful for an outstanding conversation with you, Rishad, and for your moderation. And all of you can now join your rooms when ready. and looking forward to seeing you at another Power Chat again soon. Thank you so much, Rishad. That was phenomenal.
Thank you. Hope you like that.
Eye-opening, and for me, learning alongside the audience was a great joy and privilege.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. And thanks again to Ryan, and talk to you soon.
All right, great. We'll follow the newsletter until then.
Sure. You bet. Bye-bye. Thanks.